Boom! According to that, I am live. Welcome. This is Tokyo Tonight. My name's Hiko Simon. It's 10:30 p.m. Japan Standard Time, and like it is every week, it's time to start the show. Thanks for everybody for once again rocking in. See, we've already got a lot of people in the comments. Got a fair number of topics tonight, although honestly not a lot to talk about. A lot of similar themes, but just updates on the regular stuff. Big news in Tokyo today is that today was declared the opening day of Hanami, cherry blossom viewing season in Tokyo, although we are still in the middle of the state of emergency. So the Tokyo government's taking measures to discourage actual Hanami parties. Typically people will take like blue sheets and they'll sit in parks underneath cherry blossom trees and drink and hang out with their friends, and they're trying to discourage that. But you can still walk in parks and so on and see them, and that's good. Actually, I haven't jogged this week, but if you saw my jogging, updates on Instagram last week, there have actually been cherry blossoms already blossoming. There's always some early trees here and there and so on. So there's a question: how do you determine when the start of cherry blossom season is? And the way that they do it in Tokyo is that actually in Yasukuni Shrine, the famous controversial war shrine, it's actually it's worth adding to your tourist trip of Tokyo. Certainly during this time of year, it's got one of the best parks just full of cherry blossom trees. If you want to see lots of cherry blossoms, it's a great place to go. And it's actually obviously the museum there is controversial, but it is still interesting. They actually pick, I think there's a certain number of full blossoms in Yasukuni Shrine that if they are full, that is the measure that the National Weather Service uses for declaring that cherry blossom season has started. Now, traditionally, it also works that cherry blossoms are so tied up with everything of the culture and so on. They typically bloom in the first week of April. And so they're very much associated with, school year starting and work year starting and rebirth and all that sort of thing. They're very tied in with the Japanese concept of 4 seasons. And I think it's part of the reason that they consider that the business year and the school year, everything starts in April. It's actually the fact that it's happening, 15, 16 days earlier than usual. And it's been doing so every year. It's another sign, of course, that the world is heading in the wrong direction in terms of climate change. But it is nice. We've had lots of sunny weather, and it's certainly spring is now fully hitting us. So that's pretty good. Let's check out who's in the comments. I saw some people there earlier. Odie Jr., bada bing, bada boom. Yes, indeed. Good to have you here. I did set up the countdown a bit earlier than usual tonight, although I did the tweet right before. We've got Dan H. here in the comments. Excellent to see you. Erin, many thanks again to the moderator, Erin. I don't know why it won't show the moderator icon next to her. She does have moderator powers anyway. So that is good, and she has also done a wonderful job editing all of the short videos, which you may have caught if you didn't catch the live show last week. You can, of course, watch the whole live show if you want. I think it's quite good to listen to. I quite enjoy listening to long format, shows on YouTube when I am vacuuming or doing other things. But yes, Erin actually making the content of this a lot more accessible, which I really appreciate. So thank you, Erin, and hope you're all having a good week. We've got Mr. Cordy Chep, good to see you. Gilded Nerd, howdy. Good to have you here, Gilded Nerd. Who else we've got in here? We've got NMX04, Soro Hajimacha ne ku. Hajimacha ne waku waku. Hajimachao ne. I think you're probably missing a U there, but yes, indeed, we're about to begin. Good to hear that you're excited, NMX04. Hope this is meeting your high standards. We've got Andrea Moboy in Australia. Do what Andrea's doing. I think if you just say my name, it actually highlights. But the @ mark certainly helps. And yes, if you want to get my attention, you want to say hello, you want to make a comment that you want me to react to, or you just want to make a request for a topic or anything like that, you can do that anytime in the show by doing that. Your name will flash orange, and it will grab my attention a little bit better than it otherwise would. So, thank you for doing that. We got, who else we got in here? We got Tokyo 503, excellent to see you. What's average IQ in New Zealand? Probably increased after I left. Ha 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 ha. Yes, that is an old joke that was actually famously made by the New Zealand Prime Minister, commenting on the problem of New Zealand immigration by so many young New Zealanders to Australia. To which he responded the same way that Tokyo 503 did. And there we go. No doubt the country has risen since I left. Who else have we got in here? We've got Barry Convex. Excellent to see you there as usual. There is audio. Thank you for letting me know that there is audio. Actually, just before I started, I did two things today. I flipped the microphone the other way. I've been having it hanging upside down, sort of studio-wise, but I also noticed the last couple of shows, doing it like that, it casts a shadow. I've got like two lamps like behind the camera, and it's got the shadow like right across my eyes from the mic. It's really, really annoying. So I actually flipped it back the other way, and when I did that, the whole stand disintegrated. This was right as I was about to click live. So yes, I had that technical issue, and then when I got it all finally reassembled, and it was a minute late, but I was going to start the show, then there was no sound coming through, and I was thinking, oh, have I lost all the sound settings? But I realized I had bumped the mute button on the microphone in the process of deconstructing it. So, just a normal show, normal process and technical issues, but we got here. So yes, there was no sound for a moment, but as usual, figured it all out. But thank you for worrying about that, Mr. Squatty Chap. Tai Nakamura, Ohayo gozaimasu, good to see you. We've got Quint Ranked, boom, good to see you. And all the others, we've got Sergeant Bilko, excellent to see you. Remember, as always, DJ Sunny Side Up, hey, yeah, you're just about to make a beat, awesome. I watched your live beat making show today, or I watched about 20 minutes of it when I was up at the supermarket. I was sort of walking around, waiting in a long line watching it. It was pretty cool. Actually, it was really cool. I don't think I've ever actually seen you talking before, DJ Sunny Side Up, so it was actually cool to hear your voice and hear you talking about how you make music, and I very much enjoyed it, like the drum and bass. So that was all actually pretty cool. So I appreciate that, and keep doing that. I haven't made some proper tracks in ages. So yeah. Wilson Wistan Smith. You read that Japan will lose 2.4 trillion yen if the Olympics is held empty, and 4.5 trillion yen if cancelled. Do I feel sorry for the people who suffer socially and economically? Well, I will suffer, I don't know, socially, economically. I think the money's already lost. I don't think it's a cancel now and lose less money. I think they're already 25 billion US, which I think is the 2.4 trillion number that you're talking about. And that money's pretty much already gone in terms of the cost, and I don't think no question they will lose less, but all that money is going to primarily be covered, first of all, by Tokyo taxpayers, to a lesser extent by national taxpayers, and to a lesser extent by sponsors. But basically, if you live anywhere in Japan, you're going to be paying for those losses, but particularly if you are like me and live in Tokyo, we are paying for it. So, and in the end of the day, I still think cutting losses is the best way to go, but it looks like that's not going to happen. We're going to talk about that in more detail in the show later on. We got Ago Minimal, good to see you, and welcome. Snacking White Day Choco. Very good. Glad that you are enjoying that, dining in live. Any updates on My Chan TV, Dan H? Other than I've noticed it's costing a lot, and it hasn't been working very well, so I'm thinking to shut it down, Dan H. I like the idea, but I'm not using it that much myself. So that's it. It's kind of gone a bit quiet, I know, and you've noticed I've taken the logo off here. So I want to figure out the right way to wrap it up. I would like to do an experiment like that again. I still think it's something that's missing and that's needed, but just for keeping it running, it's costing me a fair bit every month just for keeping the website up. So that's where that's at, unfortunately. Yeah, Dan H, some of the infrastructure spending was good for the Olympics. Yeah, it always is. It's always good when they build new venues. Like, there's a lot of great new facilities. I don't know that they had to actually rebuild the Olympic Stadium itself. But, other things are going to be, I think, like things like the Olympic Village are probably going to be used for housing and so on later on. And, there's always positives. It's not all negatives, but we'll see. Brianna W., excellent to have you there in the chat. Olympics generally ruin the local economy of any country that they take place in, so that's not unusual. Well, yes, except you at least have the upside of them happening. We'll see. This is obviously a very unique circumstance. I'm actually curious what the story is with Rio. We haven't really heard anything about the legacy of the games. I think I've only seen one article saying that a lot of the new stadiums and so on that they did up for the Olympics in Rio haven't been used. They've been already falling, like even just 2 or 3 years after, they were falling into a dilapidated state, which is a shame. I mean, you'd think a place like Brazil could at least fill them with, put soccer teams on them and stuff like that. I think that's what they did after the Soccer World Cup. So we'll see, but it is a bit of a white elephant, and I really think it'd be good if this is taken as an opportunity to, look at how to scale back the Olympics, or at least the cost and burden of them. But we'll see. I think we're through all the people who are joining us. So good to see that. We've got a comment from Andrea Moboy, wondering if the full word is behind you written in blue mopey dopey. I don't understand what you mean by that. So that's okay. Anyway, but by the way, if they had cancelled the Tokyo Olympics earlier, then it would have probably been recycled to 2032. But it looks like Brisbane is going for that, which I suppose technically is my home city away from Japan. I've never actually lived in it, but my mum lives there, and that's where I sort of go to. It's been my considered home outside of Japan the whole 23 years I've been here. Even and I go there regularly. My dad is now back in New Zealand, so I have a place to go back to in New Zealand now. But it's hard to look at it as my home anymore. I support the sports team. That's really about it. But yeah, Black Tengu, good to have our man or woman, I think man, I think we've covered that before, in Greece. Good to have you with us. And they have gone way over budget. It's not even double, it's like 5 times. It's like 5 to 25 billion. It's a ridiculous amount of money over, which you always get that overspending on the Olympics, but with everything going on, it's kind of ridiculous. Hopi. That's Hopi, the hopeful giraffe. Maybe some of you don't actually know the background. I'll move the camera here a moment. That is a Ken Tanaka original. He actually released a series of art, and I got one of the original. I think there's a limited number of prints of this copy. This is like from years and years ago, but I snapped that one up. It's I quite liked it. Hopi, the hopeful giraffe, from 2009. I just really like the design. So yes, that's what that is. What's the word, please? It is Hopi. It is Hopi, the hopeful giraffe. I thought it sums it up. You can actually see the wording there. Hang on, let's put it in frame there. Hopi, the hopeful giraffe. Let's put Hopi in frame. There you go. Boom. Bloke. Thank you. It's ridiculous in English that we actually have to place so much emphasis on gender in order to express grammatical concepts, but there you go. Anyway, I do have topics. We are 15 minutes in, so let's dive in. I'll try to be mindful of Aaron and make these choppable. So I will do that. I will do talking about story in choppable, presentable format, and then I will switch back into comments and definitely tell me what you think. And let's jump in. A lot of anniversaries this week. The first anniversary actually that actually took place before the 311 anniversary was the 310 anniversary that people don't really think about, which is the in fact, was it March 8? Pardon me. Was it March 8? Well, this is exactly the thing. It hasn't really been marked until very recently. It was the Tokyo firebombing, the firebombing of Tokyo by U.S. bombers in 1945. That took place on March 8th. It actually was as destructive, in fact, in terms of loss of life, more destructive than the A bombings. In a single night, incendiaries were dropped on Tokyo, particularly around the palace and Shitamachi areas, which were particularly all built out of wood, and all the houses were close together, and something like 100,000 people died in a single day just from a purposely generated firestorm. I've covered this in more detail, I think, on the anniversary last year. It's not marked or remembered like the A bombings. I mean, partly because the A bombings themselves were just remarkable and they marked a milestone in history. But it says something about the scale of this bombing, that it did as much, it actually inflicted in some ways more damage than either of the A bombings on Tokyo. It wasn't really marked. I mean, partly the commemoration and the peace park and so on in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They are Americans often misinterpret these as kind of victim self-pity memorials to and things to make Americans feel guilty about. A lot of Americans preemptively take them as like an attack on America or Americans. And I always point out, no, if it's a screw you to anybody, it's a screw you to Tokyo. All of these regions, Tokyo, Japan, like for hundreds of years has been extremely decentralized. And it was one of the things about the Meiji period and the increasing fascism of Japan that Japan became very centralized around Tokyo. And there was a lot of resentment at that, by these cities. And not only was there this huge centralization, but they were suddenly getting bombed because of the decisions of Tokyo. Their kids were being dragged away to war because of the decisions of Tokyo. So yeah, there was a lot of resentment of that, and it was partly because of that they built up these huge memorials emphasizing that they will never allow themselves to be dragged into war again. This is why after the Kobe earthquake, they couldn't call them self-defense forces into Kobe. And at the same time, it's also why the Tokyo event wasn't marked. It's funny, this took place in March. It took place 5 or 6 months before the end of the war, and even though it was as destructive as Hiroshima or Nagasaki, it didn't have an impact. Obviously, the war carried on for months, even though this is where the seat of government was. This is where most of the center of government was burned down. And it was taken after the war that were people who marked it. It was almost like a revisionist, kind of a thing, and it was sort of taken as improper. It's only been very recently that it's actually even been okay for people in Tokyo to mark the fact that 100,000 mostly civilians died, and it's not that long ago. It's recently enough that there are people alive who experienced it. Of course, there are people alive who experienced the horrors that Japan inflicted in China and in Korea and in mainland Asia and so on as well. So Japan doesn't have a monopoly on anything, and it's kind of funny in the West, there's a tendency to say, well, Japan brought it upon itself. But in the end of the day, if you're like a 3-year-old kid, who's lost your family or been orphaned or has the whole, has your whole neighborhood burned down, you didn't bring that on yourself. The government of Japan, waged a war of aggression. But in the end of the day, that really marked a point during the war that, it's crazy that somehow, somewhere along the line, it became okay to slaughter 100,000 people in a pretty horrible way, as part of a war strategy. And that's what happened in Tokyo. And look, Tokyo hasn't complained about it. Frankly, they've waited till most of the people have gone to even mark the day. But it was remarkable, and it's remarkable it happened right where I am. Hard to imagine, actually. But that was a thing. And I think another big part of the reason that it was looked over was partly because of the topic I'm about to talk about in a moment, which was the fact that Japan is so accustomed to having these sort of mega disasters that it's behind a lot of the culture that we see, the whole Godzilla thing, the whole destructive force of nature type, villains and so on that you have. It's a big part of the mindset and culture of Japan that this is kind of looked at in natural disaster terms. But it's a remarkable thing, and it's it's worth remembering that just because you're not held to account for it doesn't mean that you can't be thoughtful about we shouldn't do this sort of thing. The idea that it's necessary. If we accept that it was necessary to firebomb a densely populated city with the explicit purpose of trying to kill a lot of people, if we accept that was okay. It could happen again, and it could happen to us. Imagine if someone did to New York what was done to Tokyo, a densely populated city. I don't think people would accept there's any circumstance in which that would be justified. And, I don't think it's not a call to beat ourselves up. It's a call to reflect and accept that, we should not allow ourselves to do that again. So anyway, that's certainly a not very widely marked anniversary, but one worth noting. Shubas, good to see you, Shubas, and John Anderson. We have good to see more people in the comments. Good to have John Anderson from London and Shubas from Panama. Good to have you all here in the comments. I'm going to jump ahead to the next one. At the end of the day, says Tengu, people are not responsible for the policies of the militarist rulers. That's right. It's not to say that people didn't have responsibility for their actions and that there were a lot of people who did wrong. But in the end of the day, bombing civilian cities, that became okay somehow. And it's kind of funny because, even Churchill sort of retaliated against Bomber Command for, he wouldn't allow the air bombers who suffered horrendous casualties as well in war. But after they won, they suffered a penalty for the Dresden bombing, for example. Yet, there was no similar kind of tainted image of the Western theatre. So, yes, indeed, it was, pretty horrible time on all sides. But yeah, certainly interesting how that's there. Hey, Edogawa, Sussex Patrick, good to have you with us. So next topic. Just want to quickly draw attention to this series from, I should actually, I hate this when it won't let me open the page. I'm going to start this again. So Aaron, when you edit this short, I'm going to retake this. I'm trying to remember the name of this channel. Anyway, I can't remember it and I can't open it to double check. This channel is awesome though. Why won't it let me open the link? Duh, I'm probably going to do something I don't want to do if I keep tapping away at this. Okay, I'm just going to leave it there. Try it again. Take two. You need to watch this. There's this great series, Voices of the Past is the name of the channel, which I of course never forgot. I remembered that all along. Voices of the Past is one of my favorite channels on YouTube. It's a person who I think is based in Hong Kong, and he just takes all sorts of ancient historical accounts, but rather than like telling history, there's all sorts of awesome history documentary, channels on YouTube. But this guy does something generally on the channel. He takes the accounts of different people in history, and like for example the accounts of a soldier in Napoleon's army describing what it was like, marching around starving and being in battles and whatnot. Someone that takes ancient, Roman history writers and so on, and he actually, rather than describing the history of them, he actually speaks in the first person. He speaks about the account of Arab travelers who saw a Russian funeral taking place in the Middle Ages, and all these great things. They're all done in the first person, all of course of the speaker, and often the original accounts are not in English, often they're translations, of course. But it's wonderful. It's really well presented, and it gives you a really great sense of the history as if it's being told to you by the person that does it. It's one of my favorite YouTube channels. This person decided as a special project to break from the first person narrative type approach and do the series, which he's taken a lot of time. They only put up 2 episodes so far. I think I actually plugged the original episode of this, which was the account of how Japan's interactions with the West, basically starting from the 15th century. So episode 1, he actually gives like a general history narrative, but he tells it in a great storytelling way. It's one of the best accounts of Japanese history that I've seen, I've heard. I think it's mostly you can listen to it. There are illustrations, but you can totally just listen to it. The first one goes up to the Meiji period, 1865, and the latest one, which just went up this week, 1865 to 1905, just talks about how the incredible, it is, for want of a better term, as a descriptive term, it was a cultural revolution in Japan. This was the time that Japan went from being a third world kind of weird, self-isolated backwater to suddenly being, by 1905, when it defeated the Russians, all of a sudden a sort of a nation that was in many ways on the top, that was aiming to be on the top tier of nations, and arguably sort of got there. And it was that whole rapid ascent and transformation of the society. I mean, really on a level like aliens landing and converting the society had such a profound effect on Japan. And talking about that period of that change, including the internal rebellions and civil wars, including the ways that Japan rapidly went from being this isolated samurai country to a country with a modern military that actually, it talks about how the British were alarmed when they started realizing that the ships that the Japanese were commissioning the British to make for them were higher spec and better than the ships that they were making for themselves. The way that they had Prussian military trainers come and train them, and again they learned, and soon they were superseding, and this all came together in 1905. Of course, another episode coming soon, but talking about this whole thing, just as I was before, about the way that Japan Tokyo ended up in the firebombing raids in 1945. It was part of a line that you can really draw that started in 1865, but of course understanding how Japan got to 1865 and its interaction with the West until there. It's a fantastic series. Voices of the Past on YouTube, and specifically, you should listen to episode 1 first. But even this one, just on its own, is just so well done. Highly recommend this. Please go watch it after this or when you have time. Anyway, how Japan became a great power in only 40 years. I mean, it went from a kind of, frankly, a kind of Myanmar or Laos, or, a country that was very isolated and very, very rooted in traditions that were centuries behind, and suddenly becoming, as those countries sort of became after, I mean, even more dramatic than those. I don't think there's another case in human history of a country sort of rising technologically and changing socially so dramatically, so quickly, especially without colonization. So really remarkable time period, and highly recommend it. Go watch this. Man, that was only supposed to be a 2-minute plug, but it's worth the plug that I just gave it. So please go check it out. Into the comments. Quint Rankin, it's not like the Axis powers didn't want to do that to New York. They designed planes to do. Oh, absolutely. I mean, so like I say, I'm not saying that the Japanese government was a victim narrative in any of this. They didn't. They not only wanted to do it to New York, they did it. Japan did it to Shanghai. They didn't care at all about doing. I mean, certainly the Japanese government didn't care, and frankly, the Japanese government didn't care when it happened to Tokyo. This is the other thing. In fact, they barely even cared when it happened to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in spite of what you might think. The military, was trying to carry out a coup when the emperor finally was ready to call uncle, which was 5 months after this. It had no effect. So yes, not only was Japan doing this and Germany completely doing it. I mean, that's what the V2 campaign, and these were just lobbing bombs and deliberately at cities of civilians. It was happening. So yes, I absolutely understand and accept that, Quint, and and the point is that at least on the Japanese side, they were prosecuted for doing those things as war crimes. I think we got off the hook, but we don't even spend any time. And it's kind of funny. I think I was brought up to say that we have to lecture Japan, and about if you let them change this history or forget it, they're going to do it to us again. You have to keep an eye on them. And there's some validity to that, but it's also true that we haven't really done any of that reflection on ourselves, because we weren't really forced to. I mean, sure, there's the fact that we're talking about it says that there is some reflection, but it's something to. I think you have to acknowledge the wrong of the act before you start talking about who did it. I think that Japan's wrongs are not in question. I mean, they're prosecuted. So there's that. Voices of the Past, Gilded Nerd. Thank you. In fact, I didn't see that. It came back to me, but yes, you're absolutely right, and it's wonderful. And Aaron, I'll probably send. Everybody knew it. Well, there you go. I'm a very good, cultured group of commenters, as expected. Yeah, please do that, Aaron, or definitely put the thumbnail or something in there, perhaps. I mean, just watch this with me being excited. I don't know. Shubas, you sub to that channel. Great high quality history. See, everybody, I actually feel, I know that this is a great group of commenters, but the fact that you all already know about this shows that. One John San, U.S. military in Japan worth the negative side effects of not, do you think? Probably or not, do you think? Negative side effects. In the end of the day, U.S. military in Japan has kept the entire Northeast Asian region stable, peaceful, and the wealthiest and fastest economic developing in the world. And if they hadn't been here, the war on the Korean Peninsula, the war in China, probably would have not only continued and obliterated those countries, it probably would have gone into Okinawa and Japan and Hokkaido as well. The world would be very different. So I think the role that the Americans play for stabilizing this part of the region, as much as people can be cynical that we don't need the Americans, I think people don't appreciate America enough. This is what alarmed me about Trump's isolationism. I'm all for the bases here, actually, although there's unquestionably a price for it. But I think in the end of the day, Okinawans pay a huge price for those American bases there, but the benefit to Taiwan and South Korea of those bases and the sacrifice that Okinawans make for that, it's something that I think ties the whole region together. So, in my view, I do think that the presence is necessary, not for the purpose of occupying Japan, but for stabilizing the region. Quint Rankin, what? Japanese nationals were prosecuted for bombing cities? Under what? Germans weren't prosecuted for that, as far as you know. I thought Nuremberg trials, I'm pretty sure that there were, I mean, again, they were tokenistic. They weren't going for every single case, but I think they prosecuted in Germany Luftwaffe leaders, didn't they? I mean, again, I assume so. And in terms of the Tokyo trials, of course, Japan didn't have an air force. It was Navy and Army. But, I think that they were prosecuted for, again, tokenistically, they couldn't prosecute for everything, but I'm pretty sure that bombings of cities were part of, certainly what they did in China was part of what's prosecuted. I mean, of course, all the things that happened in terms of the Unit 731, was it 731 or 713 unit, the biological weapons unit, they bombed Manchuria experimentally, and nobody was prosecuted for that. But I think that the attacks on Shanghai, I assume, were prosecuted. But in any case, I mean, just the fact that it was a war of aggression was prosecuted. Dan H. Cough Cough. Singapore, China, Israel, Macedonian Empire under Philip II. Many others did the same. If not, had faster economic development history. Well, yeah. In 40 years. I suppose, I mean, I would love to. Some of those I don't know enough about, but it's kind of funny. You could say, I mean, Israel had a whole lot of people migrate to Israel, and it was those people who already had that technology and knowledge. Singapore was a drained swamp. It wasn't, again, it was all external people that came in. Macedonian Empire I don't know enough about, and even if it's not the fastest, it was certainly a remarkable time period in human history, and I think that this documentary captures it very well. So I do recommend listening to it. Yes, I'm not going to sell real estate on it. Sure, there could well have been more dramatic transformations, and just thinking about the interaction of the developing of the new world with the old world as well, and how that accelerated and transformed those societies, often for the worse, actually. But no question that the Japanese, the Meiji period in Japan was just an extraordinary, small part of human history, right? Yeah, Barry Convicts, great move. Good news, but Americans don't appreciate America either, indeed. Pax Americana is over, says Quint Ranked. Yeah, I think it is in terms of Trump, his isolationism. And look, America, saying that he doesn't want America to be tied up in endless wars and just pulling people out of Afghanistan, out of Somalia. Two cases I've been watching documentaries on recently. I'm sympathetic to that. America's under no obligation to be the world's policeman and going and doing those things that it does. But at the same time, a lot of the world is unfortunately held together by the security apparatus that America put in place, and a lot of places suffered under that as well. But Japan's no question been a huge beneficiary of it, and the weakening of that commitment, which we saw under the last president. And there's a question whether whether Biden's going to be able to put it back together or not. But it is important, and there's a big question is if it pulls back, which America's, I think, isolationist by instinct, and it was kind of tricked in many ways into joining World War I and World War II. It was, leaders knew that they weren't popular, that the American public didn't want to join those wars, and I think that America's been invested in the world since then. I understand America. I appreciate Americans actually having the instinct to go out and do what they do. But it's a big scary time when you take that away. What replaces it? But no, indeed. I'm going to go down. Wasn't the guy who was the architect of the Singapore miracle still alive? Lee Kuan Yew. Well, yeah. Good point. And you could say Korea as well. After the Korean Civil War had a similar thing. So you mean after Singaporean independence? Certainly you're right. The period between Singapore's separation from Malaysia. I wasn't sure if you actually meant the establishment of Singapore, which is also rapid. I mean, Singapore was wealthy in its own ways before that as a British colony. Certainly as independence, it's a great point. Lee Kuan Yew did a fantastic job. Or he did certainly a very interesting job. Yeah, I'm right. Other countries don't appreciate America. If you want us to be the world policeman, thank you. More donuts. Well, believe me, Japan's paying for the donuts. South Korea's even agreed to pay more for the donuts recently. So you've got that going for you. I am going to keep going because we've only got through 2 stories and I have so many tonight. So I'm going to have to speed it up. It's good for discipline. I'll put important topics to come. The other big anniversary, I haven't actually got many stories on this. I'm just going to treat this as the 3/11 anniversary, the Fukushima. Well, it slipped out, didn't it? It's the Great East Japan tsunami and earthquake, actually triple disaster they call it, because first it was an enormous earthquake, second it was a tsunami, and third, of course, we had the nuclear accident. And while the world, I think, still remembers it mostly as the Fukushima nuclear accident, remember the earthquake was out at sea, but it was closest to Miyagi Prefecture, and Miyagi and Iwate felt a Shindo 7, which is the full top end of the shaking scale on the Japanese scale. Fukushima was about the 3rd most affected prefecture, although certainly in terms of the tsunami, there were places where actually just because of the shape of the coast, like we had V-shaped bays, it started as a 7-meter tsunami, but some places it got up to like 33 meters, 100 feet. Of course, it was remarkable, and it was a horrific time. I shared my thoughts about the day on Twitter during the week. in the end of the day, as much as I don't want it to become a conversation about Fukushima, it just can't help but be it, because in the end of the day, I mean, I have to admit, I resent the fact that it became the thing that most affected me and most people, but it did, and not in the way that you would expect. I remember the day, of course. I remember the day vividly of the earthquake. Had to walk home. That was surreal. It was like one of those disaster movies. Imagine 35 million people walking home. Some people 12 hours. I was very lucky. I only had 1.5 hours to walk home. Just processing what was happening. I mean, it was just a surreal. It's funny. I actually saw the degree of shaking that happened during the Fukushima earthquake was the same as the Christchurch earthquake, which had happened 2 weeks before. And in the Christchurch earthquake, in the end, my grandmother's house and my uncle's house were both sufficiently damaged that they had to be destroyed. They lost their houses, although also because so many houses were destroyed, they had to stay in them for a long time before they could be replaced and rebuilt. But that had happened in Christchurch, and that was a magnitude 6.2 earthquake. It wasn't a high magnitude earthquake, but it was very shallow, and it happened directly under Christchurch, which is remarkable. So in Christchurch, you have neighborhoods which were completely leveled, and 10 minutes drive away, you have neighborhoods that look like they weren't touched. It was a very localized but very intense shaking. Now that shaking lasted only 10 seconds to do all of that damage, but it was a 9 on the Mercalli scale, 7 Shindo. The Great East Japan earthquake, which of course was magnitude 9.3, was the same amount of shaking on land as the Christchurch earthquake, except it lasted for 6 minutes. 6 minutes. And I remember as well the quake. I mean, here in Tokyo, it was a Shindo of 5. So still enough to certainly get your attention and do damage and actually kill people in some places, in older buildings, particularly in Kudansha there was a case. But I remember that apart from that, it was a weird quake. Quakes normally only go for 20, 30 seconds. The idea of a quake that keeps going for 6 minutes, and it goes through all these phases where it goes up and goes down, and it was actually because there were cascading earthquakes happening. It was triggering new earthquakes while the first one was going on. And after about 6 minutes, I wasn't even sure, is this still the same earthquake, or is this an aftershock, and they've just blended together? I couldn't even tell. You could feel all of the quakes and the length of the shaking and everything, and that was crazy. What got me about the thing overall, however, was of course the next day. It wasn't until the next day that it was actually clear that something had happened in Fukushima, and I still remember exactly how I found out. It was like 10 a.m. in the morning. NHK quickly flashed on a special news alert that they said, yes, we don't know exactly how to comment on this, but here's a picture of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Yesterday, you can see the 4 cubic reactor buildings, 1, 2, 3, 4. And here's a shot from this morning, and you can see that there are only 3 buildings. That's a hell of a way to find out that something's happened. They didn't actually show the explosion, although that was captured on the videos, but they didn't show that for days afterwards. And it was never actually widely broadcast, but, there was a hydrogen explosion, ironically. It's funny they're talking about that now that I think about it. Of course, hydrogen is a byproduct of the reactor going critical. It generates all this gas, and it's apparently the things are designed to sort of keep the gases in, but also to be able to blow out easily in the case of a gas leak or gas being generated from what happened. But just that day, what happened that day, just hearing that one of the reactors apparently had disappeared. In truth, the reactor hadn't disappeared. The surrounding of the building had disappeared, had been blown completely clear. And they said there's going to be a government press conference at 12 at midday. And I kind of said to my wife, hey, should I go up to the shops now and get some water? There was no panic the day before. I mean, it was exciting and everything, but no one was rushing for the supermarkets the day before. But when this happened, it was like, oh, geez, this looks terribly bad. So perhaps we need to shut all the vents, and should I go to the supermarket and get as much water as possible? My wife was like, no, let's be rational about this. Let's wait till 12, watch the news. So we watched the news, and the Prime Minister was saying, we apparently have lost a nuclear reactor there. And when they finished the 10-minute news conference, I said, okay, can I go to the supermarket now? And my wife was like, yes, go. So I rushed out of my building to go to the supermarket, and at the same time as I was going out, 2 Europeans, I don't know if they were French or German, that they were living in my building, but they were in full like rain gear, backpacks, and they were running out of the building. At the same time as I was heading to the supermarket, they were turning the other way towards the main road to get a taxi, and they were clearly heading to the airport, like straight after the press conference. And that was on a Saturday. The earthquake happened on Friday. That happened on a Saturday and Monday. I showed up to work, but no other foreigner, pretty much every other foreigner got out of the country over that weekend. So it was weird. I was here. Even Japanese people who had family or places that they could send their families, like to Osaka or Kyushu, they did that. I was in a situation, I had no Japanese connection in West Japan to go to. Yeah, I didn't really have anywhere else to go. My wife's work and so on was still continuing, so we agreed that we'd stay and see what happens. And I was like one of the only ones that stayed, which I don't say as a badge of pride. I simply had nowhere else to go. And I don't blame the whole Flygene thing. I don't blame people who left. I think I said this at the time. But, if you're in a foreign country where you can't process all of the local information and something like that happens, and if you can leave, no need to take a chance at all. I'm perfectly fine with people who left. But of course, I think what happened with that a lot of people have been talking about, and I think what I now remember most about that, the stress that I felt just from the way that it became like this opportunity for people with different agendas to sort of, there were people, I think, particularly anti-nuclear campaigners, who saw this as, who since the 1960s and 70s have been saying that one day there's going to be an accident that's going to, cause massive loss of human life, and then you'll see that we are right and that we should never have gotten this nuclear power. And everyone was like excited that this was going to be the opportunity to prove that they've been right for the last 30 or 40 years. And, so this idea that you mustn't trust the government, they're all lying, don't trust information that's being given to you, you're all going to die, get out of the country, save your family. It's okay for a couple of freaks to think that. But there were a lot of people, not only were a lot of people thinking this and saying this on the internet, but there were, of course, the news channels were trying to fill up a 24-hour news cycle with, information about this, and they were too scared to actually come and cover the earthquake and the tsunami and the 25,000 people dead. They didn't want to cover that. They had this big, sexy, scary story about the nuclear plant, and that took over everything. And they were basically just taking the most speculative, worst-case scenarios and just putting that over, generating this panic from people outside. And I spent months, and the other people like me who stayed in Japan, I'm here trying to get the best information for the safety of my family, which I can understand. I can understand the Japanese government information, which I'm following, and it proved to be correct. Like the speculation that the pools in the Fukushima reactor were dry, and that that there was pure spent nuclear rods being blown over Tokyo or whatever. That was actually pushed even by the U.S. government and by a lot of the channels saying that Tokyo was about to become uninhabitable. That was like the Japanese government said, we checked, there's water in the pools, don't worry. And then when I would say that to people, like, no, the local information here is that it's not at that stage, everyone's like, no, they're lying to you. And I tell you, dealing with that for months, and where the most important thing for when you're dealing with something that's about your personal safety and the safety of your family, and you're trying to use the best information, and other people are treating it like an internet debate, and like a chance to prove that they're right, and like a video game or some sort of movie. There's a lot of people that got, I'm pretty sure, different degrees of PTSD and mental illness just from dealing with all of these people on the internet who I'm sure don't feel any guilt about how wrong they were and how how they treated people in Japan, and in order to push their own agendas. Again, people were remote. It's funny, you have all this information, but at the same time, they're arguing with me, because they resent other people having a point of view different to their worldview, which they feel like is being challenged. So it taught me a lot about the way that the media cycle works, the way that a lot of human psychology works. It made me feel terrible about the people in Libya where this revolution was going on after the Fukushima thing, and how the very same sort of stuff, the same sort of remote commentary that, oh yes, there's going to be probably fighting in Misrata and Tripoli tomorrow. And me thinking, yeah, those people in Misrata and Tripoli, what they need right now is really good information, and they're worried, are they going to have to flee the city or whatever tomorrow? And again, the news cycle's treating it like a video game. And amongst all of this is the thing. Nobody died. Nobody died from Fukushima. 25,000 people died from the earthquake, but no one covered that because they were afraid of their own speculation to go up there. People, 600 people died from Fukushima from stress-related illness resulting from the evacuation and everything else. But no one actually died from the radiation. No one. Zero. And yet the people who were triggering all of that stress that basically, indirectly killed 600 people up there, still, I haven't seen any remorse. It's pretty awful. That said, and the thing is, for all of that, from the earthquake, from the tsunami, the recovery, and so on, there was a lot that went. The rebuilding was fast and remarkable. The efforts of the U.S. military and the Japanese self-defense forces to rebuild the roads and get everything back going very fast was great. But of course, the problem is, particularly in Fukushima, but also in Miyagi, those cities, all the young people had to go and become refugees in Tokyo and other cities. And, they're just, when all the jobs disappeared up there, and these were areas that were already depopulating, they just haven't gone back. So now you've got this problem. Fukushima in particular, which is obviously the most depopulated, they've got to figure out, how can they attract people back when all of the business, all of the industry that was there before was lost. A lot of the, the fishing and the agriculture, that became undoable because they couldn't sell anything. So they're doing some interesting things up there. They are doing things like they're trying to attract IT data centers and stuff like that. TEPCO obviously owes them a solid, so they're giving them cheap electricity. And TEPCO is setting up, they're looking at setting up a lot of experimental and new, and the prefecture itself, renewable energy. And one thing that is really interesting is that they're looking at setting up green hydrogen. I've talked about hydrogen a lot on this channel because the Japanese government's so gung-ho on it. Japan can't do a lot of renewables because the grid is, so terrible in Japan. They can't plug a lot of, renewables into it because it's got 8 isolated grids that, don't have the ability to stabilize or store a lot of renewable energy in a way that can allow more installation. Green hydrogen is a great solution for that. Green hydrogen is not called green hydrogen because it's green. It's called that because it's hydrogen which is generated through electrolysis, where the electricity provided for it is itself from a renewable source. So what this does is it means that you don't need to have storage on the grid. You can actually convert all of the stored energy from wind or wave or solar or whatever. You don't have to have people consuming it. You just use it all to put it all into hydrogen, which you can then store and ship around and put into cars and put into buses and so on. And it's what the Japanese government is thinking of as the best way to replace diesel and gasoline infrastructure. And it's cool. It kind of solves the problem in a way. It solves all the limitations of having renewables. Batteries are better because, of course, there is an efficiency loss when you convert into hydrogen. But yeah, I love the fact that Fukushima is also looking at ways to figure out how to get better use out of renewables and figure out ways to make them. And this is a great way to do that. So this is a way that, they're looking to rebuild and hopefully attract people back in time to work in these sort of new industries. And I think it is a great opportunity for the prefecture. But, an awful lot's been lost. And as a time to look back upon, it still is, it's weird. But, no question that the people of Fukushima have suffered the most. Iwate and Miyagi get a little bit forgotten, and I feel bad about that, as well as Aomori and Chiba and Ibaraki had terrible tsunami damage and loss of life. But Fukushima, it's great to see that they're doing things like this, which are really invested in I think what's going to make Japan a leader in a lot of upcoming tech. So kudos to Fukushima for that. Into the comments, I see IROC 299 is there. It was a crazy few months. It was a crazy long time after that indeed. Do I remember if toilet paper was an issue? It's funny, toilet paper was not an issue after the quake. Water was. All the convenience stores in Tokyo, they all got cleaned out after the nuclear thing, not after the quake. But the idea of running and getting... I did hear a horrible story, Aaron, where, a lot of the banks... This is 2011. Remember, Lehman happened in 2009. So you have all the investment banks are... just recovering, basically, they've got a lot of extremely high-paid traders, and yet all the markets are collapsed, and they're trying to figure out how to get rid of them. And they're in the middle of laying people off at the time that this quake happened. So it was kind of like a double whammy in that respect. And I think for a lot of the investment banks, a lot of the people over the weekend, they flew to Hong Kong, they tried to get a safe distance. And they showed up to work in Hong Kong and were told that if you didn't show up to work in Tokyo today, you're fired. And to the people in Tokyo, I knew someone who worked at Morgan Stanley or Merrill Lynch or one of those places, but apparently he showed up to work, and the only apart from hearing that all of his colleagues who had taken their families to safety were fired, the ones who showed up to work in Tokyo were apparently all given like 20 rolls of toilet paper and told to get back to work. And they asked, why are you giving us toilet paper? And they said, oh, I've heard that you're supposed to have toilet paper during a disaster. And this is like from an investment bank, So that was pretty awful. That was the only toilet paper story I actually heard at that time. But yeah, good question. Good night, Andrea Morboya. It's probably too late to say that now, but good to have you there. Yes, more stories to get through. How am I going to ever do this? Good evening, believe in yourself. Excellent to have you here. Let's charge on. 8 minutes, about 20 stories. Just continuing on the hydrogen thing. I mean, it's kind of funny. There's a lot of debate happening this week. I've seen a lot of news stories like Volkswagen's come out and saying, no, we're not, EU's pushing hydrogen. We're not interested in it for our cars. We just want to do batteries. I think you got to have both. For example, for trains or long haul trucks, you need fuel cell batteries, battery-based EVs don't work so well. But yeah, for Japan and for a lot of countries, it's a great way to convert existing infrastructure. And for Australia, which has a lot of coal and a lot of natural gas and so on, it's a great way to convert that infrastructure. You can actually capture all the carbon and get hydrogen out of these dirty fossil fuel sources. So this is where Japan's teaming up with Australia, and it's win-win. Australia gets to not lose out from converting from a fossil-based economy to a hydrogen or green-based economy. So yeah, it's good to see that Japan's tying up and is going to be actually within this year from a project being set up in Victoria. It's going to buy its first shipload, and Japan is down there teaching the Australians how to convert their fossil energy into hydrogen. And so this is what they call blue hydrogen, which is where they extract it from a hydrocarbon source, but they make sure that the carbon and so on, the nasties, don't get emitted in the process, so they capture it during the conversion process. And that's kind of exciting to see. Like I said, Japan kind of going its own way on this a little bit with doubling down on this, but I think it's very cool. Also another story on renewables. Like I just mentioned before, still Japan is not doing well. The nuclear reactors are all offline. Japan it's funny, the increase in the installation of PV, photovoltaics and so on has increased, but Japan is still doing quite badly on wind power. Yet Japan, of course, is an island nation. It's surrounded by oceans with unending steady wind. So there's a surprising lack of offshore wind, particularly when you compare to places like Europe. But they're looking basically at copying Europe's model for ways of doing this, putting high voltage cables under the water out to these windmills out in the ocean. Again, off places like Fukushima. And this is a great thing, even though these are not connected to a national grid. So the power can't really be very, very efficiently distributed from these offshore sources. Like it's windy up in Aomori, but there's not a lot of energy consumption there. Again, the hydrogen thing I was just talking about that they're looking at in Fukushima is a great way to capture the energy there, and then you can drive it down or ship it down the coast and put it in storage containers and still use it where you need it the most. So yeah, it's opening up the possibility to actually really open the floodgates for being able to install this sort of stuff, and it's very exciting and good to see that Japan is investing in it. Another story. This is actually this week a bit mysterious. Every week NHK, or every few weeks NHK puts out a poll, party popularity poll. These things are always fascinating. This is in Japanese, but the top left, from the top left going down, the 35.6, that is the LDP. And in spite of being flooded with so many corruption scandals over and over and over, more of bureaucrats being corrupt, more of government ministers being wined and dined by breaking the ethics laws in Japan and so on. In spite of all of this, the LDP has gone up 0.5% in popularity, while the main opposition party, the second one down, the 4.5, is going down 2.3. So the opposition should be having a field day off the government and all this corruption happening. And they're doing fine. And then the government's coalition partner, who they obviously don't even need, 3.2%, they went up as well. For those of you who are interested, the one below it's basically the Osaka is Awesome Party, the 2.1, they're down. And then you've got the Communist Party, which is always around that level, around the fourth place, is up 0.1, and then all the rest are basically irrelevant. And then you've got the most popular party of all at the very end on the bottom right, none of the above. And so it's sort of like how, Suga's own popularity has actually gone up. It rises to 40% in spite of the highest number of corruption scandals I've seen in my entire 23 years in Japan. My theory on this is that the Japanese public now has seen that there are so many unethical entertainment corruption scandals happening that perhaps the general Japanese public expects to be taken out to dinner at some point. So they've actually flipped around to supporting the government. It's the only way it makes sense. Again, just shows how incompetent an opposition do you have to be to become less popular and for the government to become more popular while people are being arrested and people are being fired left and right for just endless corruption scandals. It's remarkable. Honestly, Japanese politics is just an unending comedic drama horror. It's worth following. So yes, that's an interesting thing that happened this week. Charging on, yes, of course. On the one hand, you saw the Chinese government once again turning the knobs in Hong Kong, winding down the democracy there alarmingly quickly now, as they reach the halfway point on the time where Hong Kong is supposed to remain autonomous before it becomes fully part of China in 2042, I think. And, again, all of a sudden, after delaying the upcoming LegCo elections in Hong Kong for 12 months, in the middle of that, they've declared that they're going to change the electoral system and not allow people to run who don't meet the Chinese Communist Party standards of patriotic. So you see that, the idea that they're going to filter candidates basically for, appropriate, they're going to quality check them, and the world is acting outraged, obviously. That China trying to manage who can participate in the democracy. There's clearly just China taking over and basically abandoning all pretense of democracy. And how this is among the many problematic things happening over there at the moment. And again, the challenges that democracy is having worldwide. So meanwhile, in Japan, photo. Chiba is having a gubernatorial election at the moment. And the thing is, even the actual governor, you might say that sure, there are a couple of joke candidates, perhaps like the Joker here, and a couple of anti-vaxxers and the normal freaks and whatever. But actually, even when you get to the serious candidates in Chiba, they're still pretty bad. And so you actually get to a point where you ask, where are the serious candidates? Because there don't seem to be any. I don't know if you take this as a sign that Japanese democracy is healthy and at no risk of becoming like China, or whether you actually look at this and think maybe China has a point. I don't know. But this is the thing that's happening. I mean, at the end of the day, it's only Chiba, I suppose, but it's got a lot of people. It's right beside Tokyo. It's a significant prefecture, and this guy's probably not going to be the next governor of it. But again, this is where obviously there's no filter, so you can see that. What else? Yes, another interesting story. This was from today. Japan to ramp up human trafficking measures. I've talked numerous times about the apprentice visa program that exists in Japan and the problems with it. To quickly recap, I mean, there are 400,000 workers in Japan, an incredibly large number of people in Japan who have come on this apprentice, on this foreign technical interns training program. And what this was really about is, I mean, the PR for the program is that, yes, if you, rather than qualifying as an already trained engineer or something like that, coming to Japan to get a high-quality job, you have a problem with underemployment. You have a lot of rural factories and whatever that are closing down because they can't get new interns and apprentices to come into their companies. So they thought that, here's an idea. If you're in Vietnam or China or, and you want to go and become an apprentice in a high technology developed country like Japan, earn some money, learn a skill, go back to your country and, set up a business over there and, mutual benefit. Looks like it's a great sounding idea for an immigration program. And there are 400,000 people here under that. Unfortunately, what's happened is that it's being used largely for people to come and be cheap labor. A lot of Vietnamese people in particular being used on farms and in factories, effectively by many accounts, not always, by the way, but by many accounts. There are cases where owners are not paying them. They're locking them up. They're holding their passports. They're threatening them. Then if they leave these jobs, they can be deported. So they're kind of treated, frankly, like indentured workers and sort of effectively, I mean, indentured servitude is the definition. There are legal definitions of modern slavery, and there are cases where that is unquestionably happening in Japan. Cases which have led to murders, cases which have led to people running away, and when they run away, again, the similarities to the slavery narrative, the police care more about capturing these on the run, people who are only legal if they're working at these places that are abusing them, than actually policing the abuse of employers, or indeed looking into whether they were human trafficked in the first place, like whether the money, the remittances that they're doing are actually going back to their families or going back to people who have sort of trafficked them. So again, the fact that there are so many documented cases of abuse by employers and so on, and things that amount to things like human trafficking, as well as on the other country end. And the Japanese government, for all of these cases, 400,000 has not actually pursued a single case of associated human trafficking, which the U.S. government has called out as being not credible. And they're putting Japan's been put on this list before, around human trafficking, around women, for example, for the sex industry in Japan. They put Japan on this list, and it did actually have effect, at least to the extent that, again, rather than prosecuting the human traffickers, Japan just went and rounded up every foreign entertainer in Japan and deported them a few years ago. It's always a bit disturbing when it ends up being an excuse to crack down on the actual victims, as I fear that this will be. But it's funny, Japan reacting to America declaring Japan as a country that has a problem with human trafficking because of this visa system and because of the documented issues with it, that it's basically fostering and encouraging modern slavery, is at least it's getting some sort of a reaction. I hope it's a good one anyway. So that's that story. And we are up on time. We're up on an hour, and I still have so many stories yet to come. So, I'm just going to charge through. Japan ranks poorly on gender parity in parliament. I think this is an old story. From last week. So I'm going to skip past that. The Quad. I'm going to talk quickly about the Quad. All of a sudden, the Quad is like being thrown around everywhere. It's got America in the top there, Japan, President Modi of India, and ScoMo of Australia, Scott Morrison of Australia. It's funny, out of the four, Australia was the only member that felt like it actually needed to have a huge nameplate saying who they are, which is understandable. I mean, you think about it in the region, it's kind of odd for a country of 25 million, is it, Australia, that they've sort of got a seat at a billion people, 300 million, world's biggest economy, 127 million, but still world's third biggest economy. I mean, Indonesia could be here if you're talking about population, 200 million. Australia's got like a tenth of that, but of course they've got a very large economy and an effective military. So, kind of good that they're there, and certainly having India there balances out the appearance a little bit. Japan says it wants to be in Five Eyes, it wants to be in the Anglo-Saxon, spy network, which they, Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo nation, basically, and that's the way that the Japanese look at it themselves. And again, going back, this goes back more than 100 years, the desire to be an ally with sort of Britain's colonies. So at least India helps with the appearances of the whole thing. And I think the idea that they've set up these working groups to look at things like, security, trade, intellectual property throughout the region, and unquestionably it sort of is intended to surround and police and regulate China. Of course, the big problem is, to my mind, I think having India engaged in the region is necessary and a good thing, but India's shown it's not interested with RCEP, RCEP, with that economic treaty. It couldn't pull through. It wanted to join, but domestically it's just not able to, to sort of lower tariffs and, take away protections for farmers and so on. And that's India's own very difficult situation. It's got, this country more than 1 billion people. So, it's effectively like its own little United Nations. I appreciate the difficulties that India has, participating in these sort of multilateral sort of schemes, and I know it looks good, but they've had trouble following through on the substance. So I really like the idea of the Quad. It clearly, actually, I think the intention is to expand it to countries like South Korea and ASEAN and so on. I mean, ASEAN itself has so many problems right now. So this is probably the best way to start out. I hope it becomes something, but I honestly have trouble seeing it becoming that right now. So we'll see. Now, that was an interesting thing. PB. just make it a 75-minute thing and you don't have to rush. Well, I think I rush and it is a 75-minute thing. That's when I'm aiming for 60 minutes, it becomes a 75-minute thing. If I made it a 75-minute thing, it would become a 90-minute thing and I'd still be rushing. So yeah, I know. Thank you for the moral support, PB. I do appreciate it. Press on, indeed. Yes, onward. Tonight for dinner, I had a Taiwanese pineapple. And why did I have a Taiwanese pineapple? Well, apart from the fact it was delicious and it was awesome. Basically, it's all sorts of win in the sense that Taiwan is currently getting kind of bullied again by China, but kind of directly, exactly like what happened with the wine with Australia. When Australia started sort of saying stuff that China didn't like about the pandemic and wanting to investigate the source of it, and China suddenly just started holding up all of Australia's wine imports into China, which suddenly meant that all the predetermined sellers of most of Australia's wine were all of a sudden they weren't able to sell it to them. And it created this sort of crisis for Australia, which was exactly the intention. It was actually intended to put pressure, just like China wound back rare earths coming to Japan's manufacturing sector when they wanted to put pressure on Japan, how they blocked the wine imports from Australia to say, don't screw with us. And with Taiwan, they did it with pineapples. All of a sudden, they went and just blocked imports of pineapples, where Taiwan had basically sold all of its pineapples to China, and China suddenly said, hey, no more pineapples, screw you, Taiwan, ha ha ha. And so Taiwan was in trouble, and Taiwan sort of put out an SOS, hey, will someone please buy our pineapples? And Japan said, well, yeah, let us take care of that. So Japan has suddenly imported a ton of these Taiwanese pineapples as a gesture to basically, Taiwan is Japan's best friend in Asia, certainly maybe second only to the United States in terms of, mutual affection. Complicated history there, of course, and not all good, but certainly mutual affection. A big thing after the March earthquake. Taiwan was, I believe, the highest donating, or certainly per capita, the highest donating country to Japan. Yeah, some people, it's kind of funny. The trolls immediately, as soon as somebody said, yeah, Korea donated to Japan as well. And immediately this got news attention because immediately the whole Japanese internet said, yes, let's remember all the ways that Korea helped out Japan after the earthquake, which was apart from a total amount of donations of $7,000, Taiwan contributed $3 million. They built a building in the shape of a tsunami wave, or they proposed doing this for the Seoul City Council office beside a Japanese consulate in Seoul. There's a lot of horrible trolling and a whole lot of horrible stuff, which doesn't represent everybody in Korea, of course. But Taiwan just unilaterally, unequivocally, friendly and supportive of Japan, always on these things, and mutually when Taiwan has disasters as well. And again, when this happened, Japan said, let's give us some of those pineapples. So I had some Taiwanese pineapple tonight. It was delicious, and has the benefit of both helping out Taiwan. Taiwan is awesome, and screwing China and taking away China's ability to bully small companies. So, PB, thank you. I'll definitely take that. That was as the pineapple donation. So it's all win-win. If you can see a Taiwanese pineapple in your supermarket, buy it, because it's not only helping out people in Taiwan who deserve it and need it, but it's also showing China that you shouldn't be a bully. And screw you. And it's quite good pineapple. So nothing but win on that. I had pineapple tonight. Yes. Another story, I've talked about this before, but Mizuho Bank just has a legendary, this is what happens basically. They've had like a couple of major system outages this week where people can't withdraw their money. Their bank cards getting chewed up by the ATMs. This is basically just the legacy of banks being forced to merge 15 years ago because they all had so many bad loans which weren't being discovered because the bureaucrats who were doing the bad loan surprise inspections were tipping off the banks as to when the inspections were going to take place by being taken to Noppan Shabu Shabu restaurants. So basically Noppan Shabu Shabu restaurants destroyed the financial and banking system in Japan. And the end result was that all these collapsing banks were forced together into these conglomerate huge merger banks where, particularly in the case of Mizuho, they hated each other. The constituent banks that were forced together into Mizuho hated each other. The HR departments and IT departments actually not only refused to cooperate, but proactively sabotaged one another. And the result of that is that people, even last week, were still having their bank cards being chewed up in Mizuho ATMs because the IT departments there are still based on the old legacy banks. And the people there would still rather actually sink the ship to just despite other people on the ship than actually build a proper. It's just remarkable the trouble that they've had there. And we all thought they'd turn the corner last year when they did the final big cutover into finally having a merged system, 14 years late. But they're still having problems, and it's just from this incredible. It's all basically because of the no pan shabu shabu, the no pants shabu shabu restaurant I talked about last week. That's what's happening to your bank cards, and it's just remarkable. That's what corruption does. Aaron asking how much did the Taiwanese pineapple cost? You know what? I don't even remember. It was about $5. I think that covered it. I got like a half pineapple. I chopped it up. Actually, in Japan you always get already pre-sliced, but this was just half, completely just chopped in half, and yeah, it felt a bit wild. It was kind of good. Tasted good. But yes, definitely PB covered it there. So thank you for that. Oh yes. So another thing happened with the Olympics this week. Oh God, this is going to be a 75-minute show. Yeah, okay. The government's decided pretty much that we're not going to allow foreign tourists to come and watch, or foreign visitors to come and watch the Olympics. So they're almost pretty much declaring now that they're going to do it just regardless. You know my opinion on this in terms of the air coverage it's providing for what's happening in China with the Olympics. At the same time as they're just going to, hell or high water, obviously stage it in empty stadiums and have 100,000, athletes come in, and hope that they don't catch COVID from the from Tokyo populace, which will still have it, or bring more of it in. They're just charging for it. But they've pretty much declared that yes, they will not be allowed. If you're planning to come to Japan just to watch the Olympics, or you've got tickets, you're probably not going to be able to watch it, at least not live. You're going to have to watch it on TV, which is a shame. However, as if Japan wasn't doing China enough of a favor with the Olympics already, the fact that by persisting with the Olympics, that basically no one's really talking about the fact that China gets to hold the Olympics while 3 million people are being held in concentration camps, and the Chinese government is actively destroying the democratic autonomy of Hong Kong. So Japan's providing all of this coverage for all of this air cover for China and distracting away from it. And on top of that, China actually, the Olympics announced this week that China very generously has offered its vaccines to all Olympic participants who are coming into Japan, and they will make this available for people in Japan. So the media immediately rushed over and said, hey, Olympics minister, China's going to offer vaccines for every athlete going to the Olympics. So does this mean that the Japanese Olympic team is going to be able to use the Chinese vaccines ahead of the Olympics? To which the Olympics minister said, well, we haven't actually tested that vaccine, so no, right now the plan remains that the Japanese Olympic team will not have access to vaccines before they're not going to be given special treatment or vaccinated ahead of the Olympics. So again, I mean, of course they shouldn't be using vaccines that haven't been tested for safety in Japan yet, but at the same time, free condoms and vaccine, indeed, Sergeant Bilko. Not only are they they actually now it'll look like it's possible that the only athletes at the Tokyo Olympics that won't be vaccinated will be the actual host team. I mean, how is Japan making China look good over the Olympics right now? It's so crazy. As reasonable as her position is, it's just China's just playing Japan like a violin and doing well on this. So that's a thing that's happening. In terms of people worried about shots and how the progress is going with vaccinations, a lot of people on Twitter complaining that if I was back in the UK or in America right now, I could have had my shots already. And congrats to that. I mean, but clearly the UK and America cut corners and rushed the approval process for it. And look, congratulations. It looks like the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca, in spite of the blood clots thing that made them, was it Finland and I think Norway and so on, stop the rollout of the AstraZeneca one. It still looks like it's safe. I mean, they've done it with millions of people in UK already. But look, they took a bit of a roll of the dice, rolling it out really fast, and it's paid off for them, and congrats to them on that. And Israel is the great example of that, but UK is also now vaccinating faster than anywhere else, and I get people in Japan are frustrated that they have to wait, but at the same time, I think Japan's doing an okay job, at least in terms of, look, they're doing safety checks. There is right now only the Pfizer one is approved. Moderna looks like it's going to be the next one, but they've actually secured 10 million doses per week in May, and they've said that they're probably going to be able to get more than that in June. Distribution is another problem that's going to have to come after that, but they're setting that up as well. And we'll see. But it looks like, most people in Japan, we're not going to get it before the Olympics. But it looks like, I'm probably going to be able to get a shot of this, hopefully September, October, hopefully by the end of the year anyway. We'll see. It'll come down at the end of the day more to distribution, it looks like, than actually obtaining supplies. So I think the Japanese government's being transparent as it's securing the supplies. It's not promising stuff that it doesn't have. But we'll see. I'm actually comfortable with how it's going in Japan in spite of all the criticism. Yeah, that's good news on that. Also, some people criticizing that the Japanese media right now, the vaccines are only being given to medical workers, and they're being very careful. They're documenting pretty much any case of any side effects, and they're being very over-reporting of it, including these anaphylaxis cases, which apparently in America happen something like 5 cases per 1,000 or per 10,000 or whatever the rate is. In Japan, the rate is 200. It's being reported as 40 times that. But actually trying to figure out why is Japan getting 40 times the cases of UK and America. When they looked at the data more closely, they found out that, Japan, only about 7 of those cases, of those 40 cases per 1,000, were actually meeting the international definition of anaphylaxis, which is having any sort of allergic reaction. So they're just clearly treating any sort of reaction as that, and so the government said it's not a cause for concern. A lot of people on Twitter saying that they're annoyed that the media is actually reporting data about the anaphylaxis cases and the rates of it. I think that there's bad information, in terms of conspiracy stuff. People, there's information that you shouldn't share or just allow to be distributed about vaccines, like the conspiracy theories, like the idea that they've got microchips, or that Bill Gates wants to mind control everybody through vaccines or whatever. That sort of stuff should be absolutely stomped out, and people should be criticized for that. But I think actual scientific data associated with it, and safety data, to encourage the idea that you shouldn't trust people to be responsible, or that you can't trust people with information, is what makes people paranoid. I'm okay again with the result of this, but of course a lot of people being spooked by the fact that the Japanese government is showing this road that it's going to cause people to not get vaccinated. I don't think that that's a problem. Of course there's skepticism of it, but I think just as on a civic duty basis, we'll see. But I think the adoption rates will be fine. The other thing is that the state of emergency, which was extended until next Saturday, I believe, the 21st, actually next Sunday, the 21st, 57, right now the numbers in Tokyo of COVID-19 are going up. They are not going down anymore, only slightly, but it's still, at the moment, the goal of getting down to 100 cases per day to end the state of emergency. The numbers are going up, so the question is, are they going to have to extend the state of emergency in Tokyo longer? 57% of people polled by the Mainichi support the idea of extending the state of emergency in Tokyo. However, the government says that there's nothing else that they can really do, so they're just going to end the state of emergency because there aren't more measures that they can pull, which is kind of funny because they aren't really doing anything at all. They've just started stopping the trains a bit earlier. But it shows again that Japan is just determined to not have a lockdown, and they're kind of giving up, is basically the message here. So we'll see this week, but right now the indications are that the state of emergency will end in Tokyo, even though it isn't going to reach the targets intended for closing it. So yes, those are all the stories. Thank you once again to Aaron for doing all the short edited clips. Really, really appreciate that. This was a long show. We're up to 1 hour 17. But anyway, I'll go through the comments one last time. And let's quickly go through. So yes, Aaron, I definitely got a pineapple, and it was about that much. Barry Convex, you are based in London and have tickets to the Olympics. The question is if you can give them to friends in Japan. I have no idea. I do remember somewhat humorously now that back last year, I think Bojo was asking, hey, if Japan can't do the Olympics, London can host the Olympics. Obviously that wouldn't have worked out as a good idea. But I really don't know. But it looks like then you probably won't be able to use them. So we'll have to figure that out. I don't know, Barry Convex. I'll look out for information on that. Kang and Kodos, good to see you. Only Johnson & Johnson will be the one that protects anyone from more than just the OG strain. And right now there are so many strains, it's not actually clear how effective they all are with each one. They've only just figured out that the Pfizer, they don't need the super cooled freezers for it. Certainly the Johnson & Johnson one, just being a single shot, is pretty appealing. We'll see. But I think that you, Sergeant Bilko, you were moderated unnecessarily there. I think you mean see you next week. Although I think I also read it probably the same way that the auto that the auto censoring did. So yeah, sorry about that. Indeed, Sergeant Bilko there. See you next week. Got that. Have a good week, everybody. The vaccinated, everyone over 60 in the UK and Greece, they're starting the over 70s next week. So yeah. Also, guys, English World, excellent to see you. Will they be able to extend it with the school holidays coming up? I think they can and they should, but there again, if they're not actually going to do anything else to actually do anything to reduce the numbers, maybe it is pointless. In any case, look, once again, thank you, Aaron, for moderating and for being such an awesome editor. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you all for all of your awesome comments and for tolerating me for 1 hour and 20 minutes. It was a long show. There was a lot to cover, a lot of anniversaries, interesting topics. Remember, come back this time next week. Please don't get put off by the fact this was 80 minutes this week. Likes, I really appreciate when you do that. Subscribing is obviously good as well. Really appreciate that. Look out for the short videos that Aaron's been producing that are awesome. And remember, you can follow me on Twitter if you want to keep up with the stuff during the week and talk with me about them. I do appreciate that as well. And for the rest of you, I will see you back here next week. And Lee Steo, good to have Lee Steo in the comments as well. Thanks everyone who watched and commented, and have a good week. Stay safe, and definitely smash the like button and do all that good stuff. And see you next week. Boom. Have a good one. Peace. Thank you, Shivas. Always appreciate it. See ya. Any show.